This is a 31 Pearls production, all rights reserved.
Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe.
This is part 4 of the Wr-alda book. This section covers the dispersals of peoples, wars, the fall of all idol worship and idol worshippers, the rise and fall of many kingdoms, and a few queendoms. It also mentions Buddha, revealing his true name, and briefly touches on the Tartars. If you're new to our channel, please take a second to click subscribe so you don't miss all the latest. Part 4 of the Wr-alda book. The oldest doctrine. Hail to all the well-intentioned children of Frya. Through them the earth shall become holy. Learn and announce to the people Wr-alda is the ancient of ancients, for he created all things. Wr-alda is all in all, for he is eternal and everlasting. Wr-alda is omnipresent, but invisible, and therefore is called a spirit. All that we can see of him are the created beings who come to life through him and go again, because from Wr-alda all things proceed and return to him. Wr-alda is the beginning and the end. Wr-alda is the only almighty being, because from him all other strength comes and returns to him. Therefore he alone is the creator, and nothing exists without him. Wr-alda established eternal principles upon which the laws of creation were founded, and no good laws could stand on any other foundation. But although everything is derived from Wr-alda, the wickedness of men does not come from him. Wickedness comes from heaviness, carelessness, and stupidity. Therefore they may well be injurious to men, but never to Wr-alda. Wr-alda is wisdom, and the laws that he has made are the books from which we learn, nor is any wisdom to be found or gathered but in them. Men may see a great deal, but Wr-alda sees everything. Men can learn a great deal, but Wr-alda knows everything. Men can discover much, but to Wr-alda everything is open. Mankind are male and female, but Wr-alda created both. Mankind love and hate, but Wr-alda alone is just. Therefore Wr-alda is good, and there is no good without him. In the progress of time all creation alters and changes, but goodness alone is unalterable. And since Wr-alda is good, he cannot change. As he endures, he alone exists. Everything else is show. The Wr-alda book. The second part of the oldest doctrine. Among Find Us people, there are false teachers, who, by their over-inventiveness, have become so wicked that they make themselves, and their adherents, believe that they are the best part of Wr-alda, that their spirit is the best part of Wr-alda's spirit, and that Wr-alda can only think by the help of their brains. That every creature is a part of Wr-alda's eternal being. That they have stolen from us. But their false reasoning and ungovernable pride have brought them on the road to ruin. If their spirit was Wr-alda's spirit, then Wr-alda would be very stupid, instead of being sensible and wise. For their spirit labors to create beautiful statues, which they afterwards worship. Find Us people are a wicked people, for although they presumptuously pretend among themselves that they are gods, they proclaim the unconsecrated false gods, and declare everywhere that these idols created the world and all that therein is. Greedy idols, full of envy and anger, who desire to be served and honored by the people, and who exact bloody sacrifices and rich offerings. But these presumptuous and false men, who call themselves God's servants and priests, receive and collect everything in the name of the idols that have no real existence for their own benefit. They do all this with an easy conscience, as they think themselves gods, not answerable to anyone. If there are some who discover their tricks and expose them, they hand them over to the executioners to be burnt for their calumnies, with solemn ceremonies, in honor of the false gods, but really in order to save themselves, in order that our children may be protected against their idolatrous doctrine. The duty of the maidens is to make them learn by heart the following. Wr-alda existed before all things, and will endure after all things. Wr-alda is also eternal and everlasting. Therefore nothing exists without him. From Wr-alda's life sprang time and all living things, and his life takes away time and every other thing. These things must be made clear and manifest in every way, so that they can be made clear and comprehensible to all. When we have learned thus much, then we say further, in what regards our existence, we are a part of Wr-alda's everlasting being, like the existence of all created beings. But as regards our form, our qualities, our spirit, and all our thoughts, these do not belong to the being. All these are passing things which appear through Wr-alda's life, and which appear through his wisdom, and not otherwise. But whereas his life is continually progressing, nothing can remain stationary. Therefore all created things change their locality, their form, and their thoughts. So neither the earth nor any other created object can say, I am, but rather, I was. So no man can say, I think, but rather, I thought. The boy is greater and different from the child. He has different desires, inclinations, and thoughts. The man and father feels and thinks differently from the boy. The old man just the same. Everybody knows that. Besides, everybody knows and must acknowledge that he is now changing, that he changes every minute even while he says, I am, and that his thoughts change even while he says, I think. Instead then of imitating find us wicked people and saying, I am the best part of Wr-alda, and through us alone he can think. We proclaim everywhere where it is necessary. We, Frya's children, exist through Wr-alda's life. In the beginning, mean and base, but always advancing towards perfection, without ever attaining the excellence of Wr-alda himself. Our spirit is not Wr-alda's spirit, it is merely a shadow of it. When Wr-alda created us, he lent us his wisdom, brains, organs, memory, and many other good qualities. By this means we are able to contemplate his creatures and his laws. By this means we can learn and can speak of them always and only for our own benefit. If Wr-alda had given us no organs, we should have known nothing, and been more irrational than a piece of seaweed, driven up and down by the ebb and flood. This is written on parchment. Scriv filt, speech and answer to other maidens as an example. An unsociable, avaricious man came to complain to Troost, who was the maid of Stavia. He said a thunderstorm had destroyed his house. He had prayed to Wr-alda, but Wr-alda had given him no help. Are you a true Frisian? Troost asked. From father and forefathers, replied the man. Then she said, I will sow something in your conscience, in confidence that it will take root, grow, and bear fruit. She continued, when Frya was born, our mother stood naked and bare, unprotected from the rays of the sun. She could ask no one, and there was no one who could give her any help. Then Wr-alda wrought in her conscience, inclination and love, anxiety and fright. She looked round her, and her inclination chose the best. She sought a hiding place under the sheltering lime trees. But the rain came, and the difficulty was that she got wet. She had seen how the water ran down the pendant leaves, so she made a roof of leaves fastened with sticks. But the wind blew the rain under it. She observed that the stem would afford protection. She then built a wall of sods, first on one side, and then all round. The wind grew stronger and blew away the roof, but she made no complaint of Wr-alda. She made a roof of rushes and put stones upon it. Having found how hard it is to toil alone, she showed her children how and why she had done it. They acted and thought as she did. This is the way in which we became possessed of houses and porches, a street and lime trees to protect us from the rays of the sun. At last we have built a citadel, and all the rest. If your house is not strong enough, then you must try and make another. My house was strong enough, he said, but the flood and the wind destroyed it. Where did your house stand? Troost asked. On the bank of the Rhine, he answered. Did it not stand on a knoll? Troost asked. No, said the man. My house stood alone on the bank. I built it alone, but I could not alone make a hillock. I knew it, Troost answered. The maidens told me. All your life you have avoided your neighbors, fearing that you might have to give or do something for them. But one cannot get on in the world in that way. For Wr-alda, who is kind, turns away from the niggardly. Fasta has advised us, and it is engraved in stone over all our doors. If you are selfish, distrustful towards your neighbors, teach your neighbors, help your neighbors, and they will return the same to you. If this advice is not good enough for you, I can give you no better. The man blushed for shame and slunk away. The Oera Linda book. Now I will write myself, first about my citadel, and then about what I have been able to see. My city lies near the north end of the Luudgaard. The tower has 6 sides and is 90 feet high. Flat-roofed, with a small house upon it out of which they look at the stars. On either side of the tower is a house 300 feet long and 21 feet broad, and 21 feet high, besides the roof, which is round. All this is built of hard-baked bricks, and outside there is nothing else. The citadel is surrounded by a dike, with a moat 36 feet broad and 21 feet deep. If one looks down from the tower, he sees the form of the jewel, also pronounced Yule. In the ground among the houses on the south side, all kinds of native and foreign herbs grow, of which the maidens must study the qualities. Among the houses on the north side there are only fields. The 3 houses on the north are full of corn and other necessaries. The 2 houses on the south are for the maidens to live in and keep school. The most southern house is the dwelling of the Bergtmagd. In the tower hangs the lamp. The walls of the tower are decorated with precious stones. On the south wall the text is inscribed. On the right side of this are the formulae, and on the other side the laws. The other things are found upon the 3 other sides. Against the dike, near the house of the Bergtmagd, stand the oven and the mill, worked by 4 oxen. Outside the citadel wall is the place where the Bergthiren and the soldiers live. The fortification outside is an hour long, not a seaman's hour, but an hour of the sun, of which 24 go to a day. Inside it is a plain 5 feet below the top. On it are 300 crossbows covered with wood and leather. Besides the houses of the inhabitants, there are, along the inside of the dike, 36 refuge houses for the people who live in the neighborhood. The field serves for a camp and for a meadow. On the south side of the outer fortification is the Luudgaard, enclosed by the great wood of lime trees. Its shape is 3-cornered, with the widest part outside, so that the sun may shine in it. For there are a great number of foreign trees and flowers brought by the seafarers. All the other citadels are the same shape as ours, only not so large. But the largest of all is that of Texland. The tower of the Frya is so high that it rends the sky, and all the rest is in proportion to the tower. In our citadel this is the arrangement. 7 young maidens attend to the lamp. Each watch is 3 hours. In the rest of their time they do housework, learn, and sleep. When they have watched for 7 years they are free. Then they may go among the people to look after their morals and to give advice. When they have been 3 years maidens, they may sometimes accompany the older ones. The writer must teach the girls to read, to write, and to reckon. The elders, or greva, must teach them justice and duty, morals, botany and medicine, history, traditions, and singing. Besides all that, may be necessary for them to give advice. The Bergtmagd must teach them how to set to work when they go among the people. Before a Bergtmagd can take office, she must travel through the country a whole year. 3 gray-headed Bergtheren, citizens, and 3 old maidens must go with her. This was the way that I did. My journey was along the Rhine, on this side up and on the other side down. The higher I went, the poorer the people seemed to be. Everywhere about the Rhine the people dug holes, and the sand that was got out was poured with water over fleeces to get the gold. But the girls did not wear golden crowns of it. Formerly they were more numerous, but since we lost Schoonland, they have gone up to the mountains. There they dig ore and make iron. Above the Rhine, among the mountains, I have seen Marsaten. The Marsaten are people who live on the lakes. Their houses are built upon piles, for protection from the wild beasts and wicked people. There are wolves, bears, and horrible lions. Then come the Swiss, the nearest to the frontiers of the distant Italians, the followers of Kalta, and the savage Twiskar, all greedy for robbery and booty. The Marsaten gain their livelihood by fishing and hunting. The skins are sewn together by the women and prepared with birch bark. The small skins are as soft as a woman's skin. The Bergtmagd at Freiburg, told us that they were good, simple people. But if I had not heard her speak of them first, I should have thought that they were not Frya's people. They looked so impudent. Their wool and herbs are bought by the Rhine people and taken to foreign countries by the ship captains. Along the other side of the Rhine it was just the same as at Liedesbergt. There was a great river or lake, and upon this lake also there were people living upon piles. But they were not Frya's people. They were black and brown men who had been employed as rowers to bring home the men who had been making foreign voyages, and they had to stay there till the fleet went back. At last we came to Alderga. At the head of the south harbor lies the Wr-alda, built of stone, in which all kinds of clothes, weapons, shells, and horns are kept, which were brought by the sea people from distant lands. A quarter of an hour's distance from there is Alderga, a great river surrounded by houses, sheds, and gardens, all richly decorated. In the river lay a great fleet ready, with banners of all sorts of colors. On Frya's day, the shields were hung on board likewise. Some shone like the sun. The shields of the Sea King and the Admiral were bordered with gold. From the river a canal was dug going past the citadel, Forana, Vrunen, with a narrow outlet to the sea. This was the egress of the fleet. The fly was the ingress. On both sides of the river are fine houses built, painted in bright colors. The gardens are all surrounded by green hedges. I saw there women wearing felt tunics, as if it were writing felt, just as at Stavern. The girls wore golden crowns on their heads and rings on their arms and ankles. To the south of Forana lies Alkmarum. Alkmarum is a lake or river, in which there is an island. On this island, the black and brown people must remain, the same as at Liedesbergt. The Bergtmagd of Forana told me that the Bergtheren go every day to teach them what real freedom is, and how it behoves men to live in order to obtain the blessing of Wr-alda's spirit. If there was anyone who was willing to listen and could comprehend, he was kept there till he was fully taught. That was done in order to instruct the distant people and to make friends everywhere. I had been before in the Sachsenmarken, at the Manigardaforda, Munster Castle. There I saw more poverty than I could discover wealth here. She answered, so whenever at the Sachsenmarken a young man courts a young girl, the girls ask, can you keep your house free from the banished Twisklanders? Have you ever killed any of them? How many cattle have you already caught? And how many bear and wolf skins have you brought to market? And from this it comes that the Saxons have left the cultivation of the soil to the women, that not 1 in 100 can read or write. From this, it comes too, that no one has a motto on his shield, but only a misshapen form of some animal that he has killed. And lastly, from this comes also that they are very warlike, but sometimes as stupid as the beasts that they catch, and as poor as the Twistlanders with whom they go to war. The earth and the sea were made for Frya's people. All our rivers run into the sea. The Lida's people and the Find Us people will exterminate each other, and we must people the empty countries. In movement and sailing is our prosperity. If you wish the Highlanders to share our riches and wisdom, I will give you a piece of advice. Let the girls, when they are asked to marry, before they say yes, ask their lovers, "What parts of the world have you traveled in? What can you tell your children about distant lands and distant people?" If they do this, then the young warriors will come to us. They will become wiser and richer, and we shall have no occasion to deal with those nasty people. The youngest of the maids who were with me came from the Saxon-Marken. When we came back, she asked leave to go home. Afterwards, she became Bergtmage there, and that is the reason why in these days so many of our sailors are Saxons. End of Apollonia's book. The Wr-alda book. The writings of Frithoric and Wiljo. My name is Frithoric, surnamed Wr-alda, which means over the linden. In Lindwardia I was chosen as Asga. Lindwardia is a new village within the fortification of the Ludgarda, of which the name has fallen into disrepute. In my time much has happened. I had written a good deal about it. But afterwards much more was related to me. I will write an account of both one and the other after this book. To the honor of the good people and to the disgrace of the bad. She laughed good-naturedly and took me to the citadel. An old man asked me if I could read and write. "No," I said. "Then you must first go and learn," he replied. "Otherwise it may not be shown to you." I went daily to the writer and learnt. 8 years afterwards I heard that our Bergmagd had been unchaste, and that some of the Bergthiren had committed treason with the Maggi, and many people took their part. Everywhere disputes arose. There were children rebelling against their parents. Good people were secretly murdered. The little old woman who had brought everything to light was found dead in a ditch. My father, who was a judge, would have her avenged. He was murdered in the night, in his own house. 3 years after that, the Maggi was master, without any resistance. The Saxmen had remained religious and upright. All the good people fled to them. My mother died of it. Now I did like the others. The Maggi, also pronounced Magig or Magi, prided himself upon his cunning. But Eartha made him know that she would not tolerate any Maggi or idol on the holy bosom that had borne Frya. As a wild horse tosses his mane after he has thrown his rider, so Eartha shook her forests and her mountains. Rivers flowed over the land. The sea raged. Mountains spouted fire to the clouds, and what they vomited forth, the clouds flung upon the earth. At the beginning of the Arnamand, the harvest month, the earth bowed towards the north and sank down lower and lower. In the Velvenmand, the winter month, the low lands of Frya's land were buried under the sea. The woods in which the images were torn up and scattered by the wind. The following year the frost came in the Hardamand, January, and laid Frya's land concealed under a sheet of ice. In Selamand, which is February, there were storms of wind from the north, driving mountains of ice and stones. When the spring tides came, the earth raised herself up, the ice melted. With the ebb, the forests with the images drifted out to sea. In the Minamand, May, everyone who dared went home. I came with a maiden to the citadel Ludgard. How sad it looked there. The forests of the Lindeorden were almost all gone. Where Ludgard used to be was sea. The waves swept over the fortifications, ice had destroyed the tower, and the houses lay heaped over each other. On the slope of the dike I found a stone on which the writer had inscribed his name. That was a sign to me. The same thing had happened to other citadels as to ours. In the upper lands they had been destroyed by the earth, in the lower lands by the water. Friasburg at Texland was the only one found uninjured, but all the land to the north was sunk under the sea and has never been recovered. At the mouth of the Flymere, as we were told, 30 salt swamps were found, consisting of the forest and the ground that had been swept away. At West Flyland there were 50. The canal which had run across the land from Alderga was filled up with sand and destroyed. The seafaring people and other travelers who were at home had saved themselves, their goods, and their relations upon their ships. But the black people at Liddesbergt and Alkmarum had done the same, and as they went south they saved many girls. And as no one came to claim them, they took them for their wives. The people who came back all lived within the lines of the citadel. As outside there was nothing but mud and marsh. The old houses were all smashed together. People bought cattle and sheep from the upper lands, and in the great houses, where formerly the maidens were established, cloth and felt were made for a livelihood. This happened 1,888 years after the submersion of Atlant. For 282 years we had not had an era motor, and now, when everything seemed lost, they set about choosing one. The lot fell upon Gosa, surnamed Makonta. She was Bergtmagd at Friasburgt in Texland. She had a clear head and strong sense and was very good. And as her citadel was the only one that had been spared, everyone saw in that her call. 10 years after that, the seafarers came from Farana and Liddesbergt. They wished to drive the black men with their wives and children out of the country. They wished to obtain the opinion of the mother upon the subject. She asked them, "Can you send them all back to their country? If so, then lose no time, or they will find no relatives alive." "No," they said. Goss replied, "They have eaten your bread and salt. They have placed themselves entirely under your protection. You must consult your own hearts. But I will give you one piece of advice. Keep them till you are able to send them back, but keep them outside your citadels. Watch over their morals, and educate them as if they were Frya's sons. Their women are the strongest here. Their blood will disappear like smoke, till at last nothing but Frya's blood will remain in their descendants." So they remained here. Now I should wish that my descendants should observe in how far Goss spoke the truth. When our country began to recover, there came troops of poor Saxon men and women to the neighborhoods of Stavern and Alderga, to search for gold and other treasures in the swampy lands. But the sea people would not permit it. So they went and settled in the empty village of the West Flyland in order to preserve their lives. The Oera book. Now I will relate how the Geertmen and many followers of Hellenia came back. 2 years after Gosa had become the mother, 303 BC, there arrived a fleet at Flymere. The people shouted, "Hoen Sion, what a blessing!" They sailed to Stavern, where they shouted again. Their flags were hoisted, and at night they shot lighted arrows into the air. At daylight some of them rowed into the harbor in a boat, shouting again, "Hoen Sion." When they landed, a young fellow jumped upon the rampart. In his hand he held a shield, on which bread and salt were laid. After him came a gray-headed man, who said, "We come from the distant Greek land to preserve our customs. Now we wish you to be kind enough to give us as much land as will enable us to live." He told a long story, which I will hereafter relate more fully. The old man did not know what to do. They sent messengers all round, also to me. I went, and said, "Now that we have a mother, it behoves us to ask her advice. I went with them myself. The mother, who already knew it all, said, "Let them come. They will help us to keep our lands. But do not let them remain in one place, that they may not become too powerful over us." We did as she said, which was quite to their liking. Frya remained with his people at Stavern, which they made again into a port as well as they could. Wr-alda went with his people eastwards to the Emude. Some of the descendants of John, who imagined that they sprang from the Aldurga people, went there. A small number who fancied that their forefathers had come from the 7 islands went there and set themselves down within the enclosure of the citadel of Wr-alda. Ludgert, the admiral of Wr-alda, was my comrade, and afterwards my friend. Out of his diary I have taken the following history. After we had been settled 12 times 100, and twice 12 years in the 5 waters Punjab, whilst our naval warriors were navigating all the seas they could find, came Alexander the king, with a powerful army, descending the river towards our villages. No one could withstand him, but we sea people who lived by the sea put all our possessions on board ships and took our departure. When Alexander heard that such a large fleet had escaped him, he became furious, and swore that he would burn all the villages if we did not come back. Wr-alda was ill in bed. When Alexander heard that, he waited till he was better. After that he came to him, speaking very kindly, but he deceived, as he had done before. Wr-alda answered, "O greatest of kings, we sailors go everywhere. We have heard of your great deeds, therefore we are full of respect for your arms, and still more for your wisdom. But we who are free-born Frya's children, we may not become your slaves. And even if I would, the others would sooner die, for so it is commanded in our laws." Alexander said, "I do not desire to take your land or make slaves of your people. I only wish to hire your services. That I will swear by both our gods, so that no one may be dissatisfied." When Alexander shared bread and salt with him, Wr-alda had chosen the wisest part. He let his son fetch the ships. When they were all come back, Alexander hired them all. By means of them, he wished to transport his people to the holy Ganges, which he had not been able to reach. Then he chose among all his people and soldiers those who were accustomed to the sea. Wr-alda had fallen sick again. Therefore I went alone with Nearchus, sent by the king. The voyage came to an end without any advantage, because the Joniers and the Phoenicians were always quarreling, so that Nearchus himself could not keep them in order. In the meantime, the king had not sat still. He had let his soldiers cut down trees and make planks, with which, with the help of our carpenters, he had built ships. Now he would himself become a sea king, and sail with his whole army up the Ganges. But the soldiers who came from the mountainous countries were afraid of the sea. When they heard that they must sail, they set fire to the timber yards, and so our whole village was laid in ashes. At first we thought that this had been done by Alexander's orders, and we were all ready to cast ourselves into the sea. But Alexander was furious, and wished his own people to kill the soldiers. However, Nearchus, who was not only his chief officer but also his friend, advised him not to do so. So he pretended to believe that it had happened by accident and said no more about it. He wished now to return. But before going, he made an inquiry who really were the guilty ones. As soon as he ascertained it, he had them all disarmed and made them build a new village. His own people he kept under arms to overawe the others and to build a citadel. We were to take the women and children with us. When we arrived at the mouth of the Euphrates, we might either choose a place to settle there or come back. Our pay would be guaranteed to us the same in either case. Upon the new ships which had been saved from the fire, he embarked the Joniers and the Greeks. He himself went with the rest of his people along the coast, through the barren wilderness, that is, through the land that she had heaved up out of the sea, when she had raised up the strait, as soon as our forefathers had passed into the Red Sea. When we arrived at New Geertmania, the port that we had made in order to take in water, we met Alexander with his army, Nearchus went ashore and stayed 3 days. Then we proceeded further on. When we came to the Euphrates, Nearchus went ashore with the soldiers and a large body of people, but he soon returned and said, "The Bing requests you, for his sake, to go a voyage up the Red Sea. After that, each shall receive as much gold as he can carry." When we arrived there, he showed us where the strait had formerly been. There he spent 31 days, always looking steadily towards the desert. At last there arrived a great troop of people, bringing with them 200 elephants, 1,000 camels, a quantity of timber, ropes, and all kinds of implements necessary to drag our fleet to the Mediterranean Sea. This astounded us, and seemed most extraordinary. But Nearchus told us that his king wished to show to the other kings that he was more powerful than any kings of Tyre had ever been. We were only to assist, and that surely could do us no harm. We were obliged to yield, and Nearchus knew so well how to regulate everything, that before 3 months had elapsed, our ships lay in the Mediterranean Sea. When Alexander ascertained how his project had succeeded, he became so audacious that he wished to dig out the dried-up strait in defiance of Eartha, but Wr-alda deserted his soul, so that he destroyed himself by wine and rashness before he could begin it. After his death, his kingdom was divided among his princes. They were each to have preserved a share for his sons, but that was not their intention. Each wished to keep his own share, and to get more. Then war arose, and we could not return. Nearchus wished us to settle on the coast of Phoenicia, but that no one would do. We said we would rather risk the attempt to return to Frya's land. Then he brought us to the new port of Athens, where all the true children of Frya had formerly gone. We went, soldiers with our goods and weapons. Among the many princes, Nearchus had a friend named Antigonus. These two had only one object in view, as they told us, to help the royal race, and to restore freedom to all the Greek lands. Antigonus had, among many others, one son named Demetrius, afterwards called the City Winner. He went once to the town of Salamis, and after he had been some time fighting there, he had an engagement with the fleet of Ptolemy. Ptolemy was the name of the prince who reigned over Egypt. Demetrius won the battle, not by his own soldiers, but because we helped him. We had done this out of friendship for Nearchus, because we knew that he was of bastard birth, by his white skin, blue eyes, and fair hair. Afterwards Demetrius attacked Rhodes, and we transported thither his soldiers and provisions. When we made our last voyage to Rhodes, the war was finished. Demetrius had sailed to Athens. When we came into the harbor, the whole village was in deep mourning. Frisa, who was king over the fleet, had a son and a daughter so remarkably fair, as if they had just come out of Frya's land, and more beautiful than anyone could picture to himself. The fame of this went all over Greece and came to the ears of Demetrius. Demetrius was vile and immoral, and thought he could do as he pleased. He carried off the daughter. The mother did not dare await the return of her joy. The sailors' wives call their husbands joy or zoetheart, sweetheart. The men call their wives troost, comfort, and fro, or frau, that is delight and frolic. As she dared not wait for her husband's return, she went with her son to Demetrius and implored him to send back her daughter. But when Demetrius saw the son, he had him taken to his palace, and did to him as he had done to his sister. He sent a bag of gold to the mother, which she flung into the sea. When she came home, she was out of her mind, and ran about the streets calling out, "Have you seen my children? Woe is me! Let me find a place to hide in, for my husband will kill me because I have lost his children." When Demetrius heard that Frisa had come home, he sent messengers to him to say that he had taken his children, to raise them to high rank, and to reward him for his services. But Frisa was proud and passionate, and sent a messenger with a letter to his children, in which he recommended them to accept the will of Demetrius, as he wished to promote their happiness. But the messenger had another letter with poison, which he ordered them to take. But said he, Your bodies have been defiled against your will. That you are not to blame for. But if your souls are not pure, you will never come into Wr-alda. Your spirits will haunt the earth in darkness. Like the bats and owls, you will hide yourselves in the daytime in holes, and in the night will come and shriek and cry about our graves, while Frya must turn her head away from you. The children did as their father had commanded. The messenger had their bodies thrown into the sea, and it was reported that they had fled. Now Frya wished to go with all his people to Frya's land, where he had been formerly, but most of them would not go. So Frya set fire to the village and all the royal storehouses. Then no one could remain there, and all were glad to be out of it. We left everything behind us except wives and children, but we had an ample stock of provisions and warlike implements. Frya was not yet satisfied. When we came to the old harbor, he went off with his stout soldiers and threw fire into all the ships that he could reach with his arrows. 6 days later, we saw the war fleet of Demetrius coming down upon us. Frya ordered us to keep back the small ships in a broad line, and to put the large ships with the women and children in front. Further, he ordered us to take the crossbows that were in the forepart and fix them on the sterns of the ships, because, said he, we must fight a retreating battle. No man must presume to pursue a single enemy. That is my order. While we were busy about this, all at once the wind came ahead, to the great alarm of the cowards and the women, because we had no slaves, except those who had voluntarily followed us. Therefore we could not escape the enemy by rowing. But Wr-alda knew well why he did this. And Frya, who understood it, immediately had the fire arrows placed on the crossbows. At the same time he gave the order that no one should shoot before he did, and that we should all aim at the center ship. If we succeeded in this, he said, the others would all go to its assistance, and then everybody might shoot as he best was able. When we were at a cable and a half distance from them, the Phoenicians began to shoot, but Frya did not reply, till the first arrow fell 6 fathoms from his ship. Then he fired, and the rest followed. It was like a shower of fire. And as our arrows went with the wind, they all remained alight, and reached the third line. Everybody shouted and cheered, but the screams of our opponents were so loud that our hearts shrank. When Frya thought that it was sufficient, he called us off, and we sped away. But after 2 days' slow sailing, another fleet of 30 ships came in sight and gained upon us. Frya cleared for action again, but the others sent forward a small rowing boat with messengers, who asked permission to sail with us, as they were Jonier. They had been compelled by Demetrius to go to the old haven. There they had heard of the battle, and girding on their stout swords, had followed us. Frya, who had sailed a good deal with the Joniers, said, yes, but Wickherd, our king, said no. The Joniers, said he, are worshippers of heathen gods. I myself have heard them call upon them. That comes from their intercourse with the real Greeks, Frya said. I have often done it myself, and yet I am as pious a Frya's man as any of you. Frya was the man to take us to Friesland. Therefore the Joniers went with us. It seems that this was pleasing to Wr-alda, for before 3 months were past we coasted along Britain, and 3 days later we could shout huzzah. The Oera book. This writing has been given to me about Northland and Skoonland, Scandinavia. When our land was submerged, I was in Skoonland. It was very bad there. There were great lakes which rose from the earth like bubbles, then burst asunder, and from the rents flowed a stuff like red-hot iron. The tops of high mountains fell and destroyed whole forests and villages. I myself saw one mountain torn from another and fall straight down. When I afterwards went to see the place, there was a lake there. When the earth was composed, there came a Duke of Lindisberg with his people, and one maiden who cried everywhere, Magi is the cause of all the misery that we have suffered. They continued their progress, and their hosts increased. The Malti fled, and his corpse was found where he had killed himself. Then the Finns were driven to one place where they might live. There were some of mixed blood who were allowed to stay, but most of them went with the Finns. The Duke was chosen as king. The temples which had remained whole were destroyed. Since that time the good Northmen come often to Texland for the advice of the mother. Still, we cannot consider them real Frisians. In Denmark it has certainly happened as with us. The sea people who call themselves famous sea warriors went on board their ships and afterwards went back again. Heil. Whenever the carrier has completed a period, then posterity shall understand that the faults and misdeeds that the Brookmannen have brought with them belonged to their forefathers. Therefore I will watch, and will describe as much of their manners as I have seen. The Geertmannen I can readily pass by. I have not had much to do with them. But as far as I have seen, they have mostly retained their language and customs. I cannot say that of the others. Those who descend from the Greeks speak a bad language, and have not much to boast of in their manners. Many have brown eyes and hair. They are envious and impudent, and cowardly from superstition. When they speak, they put the words first, that ought to come last. For old, they say at, for salt, sot, and for man, ma, too many to mention. They also use abbreviations of names, which have no meaning. The Joniers speak better, but they drop the H and put it where it ought not to be. When they make a statue of a dead person, they believe that the spirit of the departed enters into it. Therefore they have hidden their statues of Frya, Fasta, Medea, Theania, Helenia, and many others. When a child is born, all the relatives come together and pray to Frya to send her servants to bless the child. When they have prayed, they must neither move nor speak. If the child begins to cry and continues some time, it is a bad sign, and they suspect that the mother has committed adultery. I have seen very bad things come from that. If the child sleeps, that is a good sign. Frya's servants are come. If it laughs in its sleep, the servants have promised it happiness. Moreover, they believe in bad spirits, witches, sorcerers, dwarfs, and elves, as if they descended from the Finns. Herewith I will finish, and I think I have written more than any of my forefathers. Fret Horik. Fret Horik, my husband, lived to the age of 63. Since 108 years, he is the first of his race who died a peaceable death. All the others died by violence, because they all fought with their own people, and with foreigners for right and duty. My name is Wiljo. I am the maiden who came home with him from Saxenmarken. In the course of conversation it came out that we were both of Adela's race. Thus our affection commenced, and we became man and wife. He left me with 5 children, 2 sons and 3 daughters. Conried was my eldest son, Hagana my second. My eldest daughter is called Adela, my second Frulik, and the youngest Noct. When I went to Saxenmarken, I preserved 3 books, the Book of Songs, the Book of Narratives, and the Hellenia book. I write this in order that people may not think they were by Apollonia. I have had a good deal of annoyance about this, and therefore now wish to have the honor of it. I also did more. When Gosa Makonta died, whose goodness and clear-sightedness have become a proverb, I went alone to Texland to copy the writings that she had left, and when the last will of Frana was found, and the writings left by Adela or Hellenia, I did that again. These are the writings of Hellenia. I have put them first because they are the oldest. The Oera book, read by 31 Pearls. Hail to all true Frisians. In the olden times, the Slavonic race knew nothing of liberty. They were brought under the yoke like oxen. They were driven into the bowels of the earth to dig metals, and had to build houses of stone as dwelling places for princes and priests. Of all that they did, nothing came to themselves. Everything must serve to enrich and make more powerful the priests and the princes, and to satisfy them. Under this treatment they grew gray and old before their time, and died without any enjoyment, although the earth produces abundantly for the good of all her children. But our runaways and exiles came through Twiskland to their boundaries, and our sailors came to their harbors. From them they heard of liberty, of justice, and laws, without which men cannot exist. This was all absorbed by the unhappy people like dew into an arid soil. When they fully understood this, the most courageous among them began to clank their chains, which grieved the princes. The princes are proud and warlike. There is therefore some virtue in their hearts. They consulted together and bestowed some of their superfluity, but the cowardly hypocritical priests could not suffer this. Among their false gods they had invented also wicked, cruel monsters. Pestilence broke out in the country, and they said that the gods were angry with the domineering of the wicked. Then the boldest of the people were strangled in their chains. The earth drank their blood, and that blood produced corn and fruits that inspired with wisdom those who ate them. 1600 years ago, this being written in 593 BC, Atlantis was submerged, and at that time something happened which nobody had reckoned upon. In the heart of Find Us land, upon a mountain, lies a plain called Casimir, which is Kashmir, meaning extraordinary. There was a child born whose mother was the daughter of a king, and whose father was a high priest. In order to hide the shame, they were obliged to renounce their own blood. Therefore, it was taken out of the town to poor people. As the boy grew up, nothing was concealed from him, so he did all in his power to acquire wisdom. His intellect was so great that he understood everything that he saw or heard. The people regarded him with respect, and the priests were afraid of his questions. When he was of full age, he went to his parents. They had to listen to some hard language, and to get rid of him they gave him a quantity of jewels. But they dared not openly acknowledge him. Overcome with sorrow at the false shame of his parents, he wandered about. While traveling, he fell in with a Frisian sailor who was serving as a slave, and who taught him our manners and customs. He bought the freedom of the slave, and they remained friends till death. Wherever he went, he taught the people not to tolerate rich men or priests, and that they must guard themselves against false shame, which everywhere did harm to love and charity. The earth, he said, bestowed her treasures on those who scratch her skin, so all are obliged to dig, and plow, and sow if they wish to reap. But no one is obliged to do anything for another, unless it be out of goodwill. He taught that men should not seek in her bowels for gold or silver or precious stones, which occasion envy and destroy love. To embellish your wives and daughters, he said, the river offers her pear stream. No man is able to make everybody equally rich and happy. But it is the duty of all men to make each other as equally rich and as happy as possible. Men should not despise any knowledge, but justice is the greatest knowledge that time can teach, because she wards off offenses and promotes love. His first name was Jessos, also pronounced Jess-us, but the priests who hated him called him foe, that is, false. The people called him Krishna, that is, shepherd, and his Frisian friend called him Buddha, which means purse, because he had in his head a treasure of wisdom, and in his heart a treasure of love. At last he was obliged to flee from the wrath of the priests, but wherever he went, his teaching had preceded him, whilst his enemies followed him like his shadow. When Jessos had thus traveled for 12 years, he died, but his friends preserved his teaching and spread it wherever they found listeners. What do you think the priests did then? That I must tell you, and you must give your best attention to it. Moreover, you must keep guard against their acts and their tricks with all the strength that Wr-alda has given you. While the doctrine of Jessos was thus spreading over the earth, the false priests went to the land of his birth to make his death known. They said they were his friends, and they pretended to show great sorrow by tearing their clothes and shaving their heads. They went to live in caves in the mountains, but in them they had hid all their treasures, and they made in them images of Jessos. They gave these statues to simple people, and at last they said that Jessos was a god, that he had declared this himself to them, and that all those who followed his doctrine should enter his kingdom hereafter, where all was joy and happiness. Because they knew that he was opposed to the rich, they announced everywhere that poverty, suffering, and humility were the door by which to enter into his kingdom, and that those who had suffered the most on earth should enjoy the greatest happiness there. Although they knew that Jessos had taught that men should regulate and control their passions, they taught that men should stifle their passions, and that the perfection of humanity consisted in being as unfeeling as the cold stones. In order to make the people believe that they did as they preached, they pretended to outward poverty, and that they had overcome all sensual feelings. They took no wives, but if any young girl had made a false step, it was quickly forgiven. The weak, they said, were to be assisted, and to save their souls men must give largely to the church. Acting in this way, they had wives and children without households and were rich without working. But the people grew poorer and more miserable than they had ever been before. This doctrine, which requires the priests to possess no further knowledge than to speak deceitfully, and to pretend to be pious while acting unjustly, spreads from east to west, and will come to our land also. But when the priests fancy that they have entirely extinguished the light of Frya and Jessos, then shall all classes of men rise up who have quietly preserved the truth among themselves, and have hidden it from the priests. They shall be of princely blood of priests, Slavonic and Frya's blood. They will make their light visible, so that all men shall see the truth. They shall cry woe to the acts of the princes and the priests. The princes who love the truth and justice shall separate themselves from the priests. Blood shall flow, but from it the people will gather new strength. Find us folk shall contribute their industry to the common good, Linda's folk their strength, and we our wisdom. Then the false priest shall be swept away from the earth. Wr-alda's spirit shall be invoked everywhere and always. The laws that Wr-alda in the beginning instilled into our consciences shall alone be listened to. There shall be neither princes nor masters nor rulers, except those chosen by the general voice. Then Frya shall rejoice, and the earth will only bestow her gifts on those who work. All this shall begin 4,000 years after the submersion of Atlantis. And 1,000 years later there shall exist no longer either priest or oppression. Della, surnamed Hellenia, watch. Thus runs Frana's last will. All noble Frisians, Heil, in the name of Wr-alda, of Frya, and of freedom, I greet you, and pray you if I die before I have named a successor, then I recommend to you Tuntia, who is Bergt-maged in the citadel of Medias-Bleak. Till now she is the best. This Gosa has left behind her. Hail to all men. I have named no Eremoder because I know none, and because it is better for you to have no mother than to have one you cannot trust. One bad time is passed by, but there is still another coming. Irtha has not given it birth, and Wr-alda has not decreed it. It comes from the east, out of the bosom of the priests. It will breed so much mischief that Irtha will not be able to drink the blood of her slain children. It will spread darkness over the minds of men like storm clouds over the sunlight. Everywhere craft and deception shall contend with freedom and justice. Freedom and justice shall be overcome, and we with them, but this success will work out its own loss. Our descendants shall teach their people and their slaves the meaning of 3 words. They are universal love, freedom, and justice. At first they shall shine, then struggle with darkness. until every man's head and heart has become bright and clear. Then shall oppression be driven from the earth, like the thunder clouds by the storm wind, and all deceit will cease to have any more power. Gosa. The Wr-alda book, Stories of Survivors of Atlantis, read by 31 Pearls. The writing of Kona read. My forefathers have written this book in succession. I will do this the more, because there exists no longer in my state any citadel on which events are inscribed as used to be the case. My name is Kona Red. My father's name was Wr-alda. My mother's name was Wiljo. After my father's death, I was chosen as his successor. When I was 50 years old, I was chosen for chief Grevitman. My father has written how the Linda Orden and Lindgarden were destroyed. Lindahem is still lost. The Linda Orden, partially, and the North Lindgarden are still concealed by the salt sea. The foaming sea washes the ramparts of the castle, as my father has mentioned. The people, being deprived of their harbor, went away and built houses inside the ramparts of the citadel. Therefore that bastion is called Lindward. The sea people say Linward, but that is nonsense. In my youth there was a portion of land lying outside the rampart, all mud and marsh. But Frya's people were neither tired nor exhausted when they had a good object in view. By digging ditches and making dams of the earth that came out of the ditches, we recovered a good space of land outside the rampart, which had the form of a hoof. 3 poles eastward, 3 southwards, and 3 westwards. At present we are engaged in ramming piles into the ground to make a harbor to protect our rampart. When the work is finished, we shall attract mariners. In my youth it looked very queer, but now there stands a row of houses. Leaks and deficiencies produced by poverty have been remedied by industry. From this men may learn that Wr-alda, our universal father, protects all his creatures if they preserve their courage and help each other. The Wr-alda book. Now I will write about Friso. Friso, who was already powerful by his troops, was chosen chief Grevitman of the districts round Stavaran. He laughed at our mode of defending our land and our sea fights. Therefore he established a school where the boys might learn to fight in the Greek manner. But I believe that he did it to attach the young people to himself. I sent my brother there 10 years ago, because I thought, now that we have not got any mother, it behoves me to be doubly watchful, in order that he may not become our master. Goss has given us no successors. I will not give any opinion about that. But there are still old suspicious people who think that she and Friso had an understanding about it. When Gosa died, the people from all parts wished to choose another mother. But Friso, who was busy establishing a kingdom for himself, did not desire to have any advice or messenger from Tierland. When the messengers of the Landsaten came to him, he said that Gosa had been far-seeing and wiser than all the counts together, and yet she had been unable to see any light or way out of this affair. Therefore she had not had the courage to choose a successor, and to choose a doubtful one she thought would be very bad. Therefore she wrote in her last will, "It is better to have no mother than to have one on whom you cannot rely." Friso had seen a great deal. He had been brought up in the wars, and he had just learned and gathered as much of the tricks and cunning ways of the Gauls and the princes as he required, to lead the other counts wherever he wished. See here how he went to work about that. Friso had taken here another wife, a daughter of Wilfrey, who in his lifetime had been chief count of Stavaran. By her he had 2 sons and 2 daughters. By his wish Cornelia, his youngest daughter, was married to my brother. Cornelia is not good Frisian. Her name ought to be written Cornhelia. Wemod, his eldest daughter, he married to Kauk. Kauk, who went to school to him, is the son of Wickhurta, the king of the Geertmen. But Kauk is likewise not good Frisian, and ought to be Cap. So they have learned more bad language than good manners. Now I must return to my story. After the great flood of which my father wrote an account, there came many Jutlanders and Letlanders out of the Baltic, or Bad Sea. They were driven down the Kattegat in their boats by the ice, as far as the coast of Denmark, and there they remained. There was not a creature to be seen, so they took possession of the land, and named it after themselves, Jutland. Afterwards, many of the Denmarkers returned from the higher lands, but they settled more to the south. And when the mariners returned who had not been lost, they all went together to Zealand. By this arrangement, the Jutlanders retained the land to which Wr-alda had conducted them. The Zealand skippers, who were not satisfied to live upon fish, and who hated the Gauls, took to robbing the Phoenician ships. In the southwest point of Scandinavia, there lies Lindisbergt, called Lindas Nossi, built by one Apol, as is written in the book. All the people who live on the coasts and in the neighboring districts had remained true Frisians, but by their desire for vengeance upon the Gauls and the followers of Kaltona, they joined the Zealanders. But that connection did not hold together, because the Zealanders had adopted many evil manners and customs of the wicked Magyars in opposition to Frya's people. Afterwards, everybody went stealing on his own account, but when it suited them, they held all together. At last, the Zealanders began to be in want of good ships. Their shipbuilders had died, and their forests, as well as their land, had been washed out to sea. Now there arrived unexpectedly 3 ships, which anchored off the ring dike of our citadel. By the disruption of our land they had lost themselves and had missed Flymond. The merchant who was with them wished to buy new ships from us, and for that purpose had brought all kinds of valuables, which they had stolen from the Celtic country and Phoenician ships. As we had no ships, I gave them active horses and 4 armed couriers to Friso, because at Stavere, along the Alberga, the best ships of war were built of hard oak, which never rots. While these sea rovers remained with us, some of the Jutmen had gone to Texland, and thence to Friso. The Zealanders had stolen many of their strongest boys to row their ships, and many of their finest daughters to have children by. The great Jutlanders could not prevent it, as they were not properly armed. When they had related all their misfortunes, and a good deal of conversation had taken place, Friso asked them at last if they had no good harbors in their country. "Oh yes," they answered, "a beautiful one created by Wr-alda. It is like a bottle, the neck narrow, but in the belly 1,000 large boats may lie. But we have no citadel, and no defenses to keep out the pirate ships." "Then you should make them," said Friso. "That is very good advice," said the Jutlanders, "but we have no workmen and no building materials. We are all fishermen and trawlers. The others are drowned or fled to the higher lands." While they were talking in this way, my messengers arrived at the court with the Zealand gentlemen. Here you must observe how Friso understood deceiving everybody, to the satisfaction of both parties, and to the accomplishment of his own ends. To the Zealanders, he promised that they should have yearly 50 ships of a fixed size for a fixed price, fitted with iron chains and crossbows, and fall rigging as is necessary and useful for men of war. But that they should leave in peace the Jutlanders and all the people of Frya's race. But he wished to do more. He wanted to engage all our sea rovers to go with him upon his fighting expedition. When the Zealanders had gone, he loaded 40 old ships with weapons for wall defenses, wood, bricks, carpenters, masons, and smiths, in order to build citadels. Wito, or Wita, his son, he sent to superintend. I have never been well informed of what happened, but this much is clear to me, that on each side of the harbor a strong citadel has been built, and garrisoned by people brought by Friso out of Sachsenmarken. Vito courted Suchtyrte and married her. Wilhelm, her father, was chief alderman of the Jutmen, that is, chief grevitman or count. Wilhelm died shortly afterwards, and Vita was chosen in his place. The Wr-alda book. What Frya did further. Of his first wife he still had 2 brothers-in-law, who were very daring. Hedo, that is, Heat, the youngest, he sent as messenger to Kataburgt, which lies far in the Sachsenmarken. Frya gave him to take 7 horses besides his own, laden with precious things stolen by the sea rovers. With each horse there were 2 young sea rovers and 2 young horsemen, clad in rich garments and with money in their purses. In the same way as he sent Hedo to Kataburgt, he sent Bruno, that is, Brown, the other brother-in-law, to Managarda Ord. Managarda Ord was written Managarda Ford in the earlier part of this book, but that is wrong. All the riches that they took with them were given away, according to circumstances, to princes, princesses, and chosen young girls. When his young men went to the tavern to dance with the young people there, they ordered baskets of spice, gingerbread, and tons of the best beer. Tons are large casks. After these messengers, he let his young people constantly go over to the Sachsenmarken, always with money in their purses and presents to give away, and they spent money carelessly in the taverns. When the Saxon youths looked with envy at this, they smiled and said, "If you dare go and fight the common enemy, you would be able to give much richer presents to your brides, and live much more princely." Both the brothers-in-law of Frya had married daughters of the chief princes, and afterwards the Saxon youths and girls came in whole troops to the Flymere. The Burgt maidens and old maidens, who still remembered their greatness, did not hold with Frya's object, and therefore they said no good of him. But Frya, more cunning than they, let them chatter, but the younger maidens he led to his side with golden fingers. They said everywhere, "For a long time we have had no mother, but that comes from our being fit to take care of ourselves. At present it suits us best to have a king to win back our lands that we have lost through the imprudence of our mothers." Further, they said, "Every child of Frya has permission to let his voice be heard before the choice of a prince is decided. But if it comes to that you choose a king, then also we will have our say. From all that we can see, Wr-alda has appointed Frya for it, for he has brought him here in a wonderful way. Frya knows the tricks of the Gauls, whose language he speaks. He can therefore watch against their craftiness. Then there is something else to keep the eye upon. What count could be chosen as king without the others being jealous of him?" All such nonsense the young maidens talked, but the old maidens, though few in number, tapped their advice out of another cask. They said always and to everyone, "Frya does like the spiders. At night he spreads his webs in all directions, and in the day he catches in them all his unsuspecting friends. Frya says he cannot suffer any priests or foreign princes, but we say that he cannot suffer anybody but himself. Therefore he will not allow the citadel of Stevie to be rebuilt. Therefore he will not have the mother again. Today Frya is your counselor. Tomorrow he will be your king, in order to have full power over you." Among the people there now existed 2 parties. The old and the poor wished to have the mother again, but the young and the warlike wished for a father and a king. The first called themselves mother's sons, the others father's sons. But the mother's sons did not count for much. Because there were many ships to build, there was a good time for all kinds of workmen. Moreover, the sea rovers brought all sorts of treasures, with which the maidens were pleased, the girls were pleased, and their relations and friends. When Frya had been nearly 40 years at Stavren, he died. Owing to him, many of the states had been joined together again, but that we were the better for it, I am not prepared to certify. Of all the counts that preceded him, there was none so renowned as Frya, for as I said before, the young maidens spoke in his praise, while the old maidens did all in their power to make him hateful to everybody. Although the old women could not prevent his meddling, they made so much fuss that he died without becoming king. The Oera book. Now I will write about his son Adel. Friso, who had learned our history from the book of the Adelingen, had done everything in his power to win their friendship. His eldest son, whom he had by his wife Swethirte, he named Adel, and although he strove with all his might to prevent the building or restoring any citadels, he sent Adel to the citadel of Texland in order to make himself better acquainted with our laws, language, and customs. When Adel was 20 years old, Friso brought him into his own school, and when he had fully educated him, he sent him to travel through all the states. Adel was an amiable young man, and in his travels he made many friends. So the people called him Atharik, that is, rich in friends, which was very useful to him afterwards, for when his father died, he took his place without a question of any other count being chosen. While Adel was studying at Texland, there was a lovely maiden at the citadel. She came from Sachsenmarken, from the state of Swobaland. Therefore she was called at Texland Swobin, although her name was Ifkja. Adel fell in love with her, and she with him, but his father wished him to wait a little. Adel did as he wished, but as soon as he was dead, sent messengers to Berthold, her father, to ask her in marriage. Berthold was a prince of high-principled feelings. He had sent his daughter to Texland, in the hope that she might be chosen Burgtmagd in her country. But when he knew of their mutual affection, he bestowed his blessing upon them. Ifkja was a clever Frisian. As far as I have been able to learn, she always toiled and worked to bring the Frya's people back under the same laws and customs. To bring the people to her side, she traveled with her husband through all Sachsenmarken, and also to Geertmania, as the Geertmen had named the country which they had obtained by means of Goss. Thence they went to Denmark, and from Denmark by sea to Texland. From Texland they went to Westflyland, and so along the coast to Walhalligara. Thence they followed the Zuideren, the Waal, till, with great apprehension, they arrived beyond the Rhine at the Marsatten, of whom our Apollonia has written. When they had stayed there a little time, they returned to the lowlands. When they had been some time descending towards the lowlands, and had reached about the old citadel of Aachen, 4 of their servants were suddenly murdered and stripped. They had loitered a little behind. My brother, who was always on the alert, had forbidden them to do so, but they did not listen to him. The murderers that had committed this crime were Twisklanders, who had at that time audaciously crossed the Rhine to murder and to steal. The Twisklanders are banished and fugitive children of Frya, but their wives they have stolen from the Tartars. The Tartars are a brown tribe of Find-Us people, who are thus named because they make war on everybody. They are all horsemen and robbers. This is what makes the Twisklanders so bloodthirsty. The Twisklanders who had done the wicked deed called themselves Frisian or Franken. There were among them, my brother said, red, brown, and white men. The red and brown made their hair white with lime water, but as their faces remained brown, they were only the more ugly. In the same way as Apollonia, they visited Liddesberg and the Alderga. Afterwards, they made a tour of all the neighborhood of Stavra. They behaved with so much amiability that everywhere the people wished to keep them. 3 months later, Adel sent messengers to all the friends that he had made, requesting them to send to him their wise men in the month of May. Afterwards, they made a tour of all the neighborhood of Stavra. They behaved with so much amiability that everywhere the people wished to keep them. 3 months later, Adel sent messengers to all the friends that he had made, requesting them to send to him their wise men in the month of May. Here we have omitted text by copier Hiddo Oera Linda's mistake. We continue. His wife, he said, who had been Magd of Texland, had received a copy of it. In Texland many writings are still found which are not copied in the book of the Adelingen. One of these writings had been placed by Goss with her last will, which was to be opened by the oldest maiden, Albitha, as soon as Frya was dead. The Wr-alda book. Here is the writing with Gos's advice. When Wr-alda gave children to the mothers of mankind, he gave one language to every tongue and to all lips. This gift Wr-alda had bestowed upon men, in order that by its means they might make known to each other what must be avoided, and what must be followed to find salvation, and to hold salvation to all eternity. Wr-alda is wise and good and all-foreseeing. As he knew that happiness and holiness would flee from the earth when wickedness could overcome virtue, he has attached to the language an equitable property. This property consists in this, that men can neither lie nor use deceitful words without stammering or blushing, by which means the innately bad are easily known. As thus our language opens the way to happiness and blessedness, and thus helps to guard against evil inclinations. It is rightly named the language of the gods, and all those by whom it is held in honor derive honor from it. But what has happened? As soon as among our half-brothers and sisters deceivers arose, who gave themselves out as servants of the good, it soon became otherwise. The deceitful priests and the malignant princes, who always clung together, wished to live according to their own inclinations without regard to the laws of right. In their wickedness they went so far as to invent other languages, so that they might speak secretly in anybody's presence of their wicked and unworthy affairs without betraying themselves by stammering, and without showing a blush upon their countenances. But what has that produced? Just as the seed of good herbs, which has been sown by good men in the open day, springs up from the ground, so time brings to light the evil seed, which has been sown by wicked men in secret and in darkness. The wanton girls and effeminate youths, who consorted with the immoral priests and princes, taught the new language to their companions, and thus spread it among the people, till God's language was clean forgotten. Would you know what came of all this? How that stammering and blushing no longer betrayed their evil doings? Virtue passed away, wisdom and liberty followed. Unity was lost, and quarreling took its place. Love flew away, and unchastity and envy met round their tables. And where previously justice reigned, now it is the sword. All are slaves, the subjects of their masters, envy, bad passions, and covetousness. If they had only invented one language, things might possibly have still gone on well. But they invented as many languages as there are states, so that one people can no more understand another people than a cow a dog or a wolf a sheep. The mariners can bear witness to this. From all this it results that all the slave people look upon each other as strangers, and that as a punishment of their inconsiderateness and presumption, they must quarrel and fight till they are all destroyed. The Wr-alda book. Here is my counsel. If you wish that you alone should inherit the earth, you must never allow any language but God's language to pass your lips. And take care that your own language remains free from outlandish sounds. If you wish that some of Lida's children and some of Finda's children remain, you must do the same. The language of the East Schoonlanders has been perverted by the vile Magyars, and the language of the followers of Kaltana has been spoiled by the dirty Gauls. Now we have been weak enough to admit among us the returned followers of Hellenia, but I anxiously fear that they will reward our weakness by debasing our pure language. Many things have happened to us, but among all the citadels that have been disturbed and destroyed in the bad time, Irtha has preserved Frya's uninjured, and I may remark that Frya's or God's language has always remained here untainted. Here in Texland, therefore, schools should be established, and from all the states that have kept to the old customs, the young people should be sent here, and afterwards those whose education is complete can help those who remain at home. If foreigners come to buy ironwares from you and want to talk and bargain, they must come back to God's language. If they learn God's language, then the words, to be free and to have justice, will come to them, and glimmer and glitter in their brains to a perfect light. And that flame will destroy all bad princes and hypocritical, dirty priests. The native and foreign messengers were pleased with that writing, but no schools came from it. Then Adel established schools himself. Every year Adel and Ifya went to inspect the schools. If they found a friendly feeling existing between the natives and foreigners, they were extremely pleased. If there were any who had sworn friendship together, they assembled the people, and with great ceremony let them inscribe their names in a book which was called the Book of Friendship. And afterwards a festival was held. All these customs were kept up in order to bring together the separate branches of Frya's race. But the maidens, who were opposed to Adel and Ifya, said that they did it for no other reason than to make a name for themselves, and to bring all the other states under their subjection. Among my father's papers I found a letter from Ludgert the Geertman. Omitting some passages which only concern my father, I proceed to relate the rest. Punjab, that is 5 rivers, and by which we travel, is a river of extraordinary beauty, and is called 5 rivers, because 4 other streams flow into the sea by its mouth. Far away to the eastward is another large river, the holy or sacred Ganges. Between these 2 rivers is the land of the Hindus. Both rivers run from the high mountains to the plains. The mountains in which their sources lie are so high that they reach the heavens, and therefore these mountains are called Himalaya. Among the Hindus and others out of these countries, there are people who meet together secretly. They believe that they are Finda's pure children, and that she was born in the Himalaya mountains, whence she went with her children to the lowlands. Some of them believe that she, with her children, floated down upon the foam of the Ganges, and that is the reason why the river is called the sacred Ganges. But the priests, who came from another country, traced out these people and had them burnt, so that they do not dare to declare openly their creed. In this country, all the priests are fat and rich. In their churches there are all kinds of monstrous images, many of them of gold. To the west of the Punjab are the Iraniers, or Moros, Drangianen, the Gedrosten, Gedrosier, or runaways, and the Urgeten, or forgotten. These names are given by the priests out of spite, because they fled from their customs and religion. On their arrival, our forefathers likewise established themselves to the east of the Punjab. But on account of the priests, they likewise went to the west. In that way we learned to know the Iran and other people. The Iran are not savages but good people, who neither pray to nor tolerate images. Neither will they suffer priests or churches. But as we adhere to the light of fasts, so they everywhere maintain fire in their houses. Coming still further westward, we arrive at the Gedrosten. Regarding the Gedrosten, they have been mixed with other people and speak a variety of languages. These people are really savage murderers, who always wander about the country on horseback, hunting and robbing, and hire themselves as soldiers to the surrounding princes, at whose command they destroy whatever they can reach. The country between the Punjab and the Ganges is as flat as Friesland near the sea, and consists of forests and fields, fertile in every part. But this does not prevent the people from dying by thousands of hunger. The famines, however, must not be attributed to Wr-alda or Eartha, but to the princes and priests. The Hindus are timid and submissive before their princes, like hinds before wolves. Therefore the Iran and others have called them Hindus, which means hinds. But their timidity is frightfully abused. If strangers come to purchase corn, everything is turned into money, and this is not prevented by the priests, because they, being more crafty and rapacious than all the princes put together, know very well that all the money will come into their pockets. Besides what the people suffer from their princes, they suffer a great deal from poisonous and wild beasts. There are great elephants that sometimes go about in whole flocks and trample down cornfields and whole villages. There are great black and white cats which are called tigers. They are as large as calves, and they devour both men and beasts. Besides other creeping animals, there are snakes from the size of a worm to the size of a tree. The largest can swallow a cow, but the smallest are the most deadly. They conceal themselves among the fruits and flowers and surprise the people who come to gather them. Anyone who is bitten by them is sure to die, as Eartha has given no antidote to their poison, because the people have so given themselves up to idolatry. There are besides all sorts of lizards, tortoises, and crocodiles. All these reptiles, like the snakes, vary from the size of a worm to the trunk of a tree. According to their size and fierceness, they have names which I cannot recollect, but the largest are called alligators, because they eat as greedily the putrid cattle that float down the stream as they do living animals that they seize. On the west of the Punjab where we come from, and where I was born, the same fruits and crops grow as on the east side. Formerly there existed also the same crawling animals, but our forefathers burnt all the underwood, and so diligently hunted all the wild animals that there are scarcely any left. To the extreme west of the Punjab there is found rich clay land, as well as barren heaths, which seem endless. Occasionally varied lovely spots on which the eye rests, enchanted. Among the fruits there are many that I have not found here. Among the various kinds of corn, some is as yellow as gold. There are also golden apples, of which some are as sweet as honey, and others as sour as vinegar. In our country, there are nuts as large as a child's head. They contain cheese and milk. When they are old, oil is made from them. Of the husks, ropes are made, and of the shells, cups and other household utensils are made. I have found in the woods here bramble and holly berries. In my country we have trees bearing berries as large as your lime trees, the berries of which are much sweeter and 3 times as large as your gooseberries. When the days are at the longest, and the sun is in the zenith, a man's body has no shadow. If you sail very far to the south and look to the east at midday, the sun shines on your left side, as it does in other countries on the right side. With this I will finish. It will be easy for you, by means of what I have written, to distinguish between false accounts and true descriptions. Your Ludgert. The Wr-alda book, The Writing of Beden. My name is Beden, son of Hakana. My uncle, not having married, left no children. I was elected in his place. Adel, the 3rd king of that name, approved of the choice, provided I should acknowledge him as master. In addition to the entire inheritance of my uncle, he gave me some land which joined my inheritance, on condition that I would settle people there who should never his people. Missing text. Therefore I will allow it a place here. The Wr-alda book, letter of Rika the Oudmaagd, read at Stavern at the Yule feast. My greeting to all of you whose forefathers came here with Friso. According to what you say, you are not guilty of idolatry. I will not speak about that now, but will at once mention a failing which is very little better. You know, or you do not know, how many titles Wr-alda has, but you all know that he is named Universal Provider, because that everything comes and proceeds from him for the sustenance of his creatures. It is true that Eartha is named sometimes the feeder of all, because she brings forth all the fruits and grains on which men and beasts are fed, but she would not bear any fruit or grain unless Wr-alda gave her the power. Women who nourish their children at their breasts are called nurses, but if Wr-alda did not give them milk, the children would find no advantage. So that, in short, Wr-alda really is the nourisher. That Eartha should be called the universal nourisher, and that a mother should be called a feeder one can understand, figuratively speaking. But that a father should be called a feeder because he is a father goes against all reason. Now I know whence all this folly comes. Listen to me. It comes from our enemies. And if this is followed up, you will become slaves, to the sorrow of Frya, and to the punishment of your pride. I will tell you what happened to the slave people. From that you may take warning. The foreign kings who follow their own will place Wr-alda below the crown. From envy that Wr-alda is called the universal father, they wish also to be called fathers of the people. Now everybody knows that kings do not regulate the productiveness of the earth, and that they have their sustenance by means of the people, but still they will persist in their arrogance, in order to attain their object. They were not satisfied from the beginning with free gifts, but imposed a tax upon the people. With the tax thus raised, they hired foreign soldiers whom they retained about their courts. Afterwards they took as many wives as they pleased, and the smaller princes and gentry did the same. When in consequence quarrels and disputes arose in the households, and complaints were made about it, they said, "Every man is the father, feeder of his household. Therefore he shall be master and judge over it." Thus arose arbitrariness, and as the men ruled over their households, the kings would do over their people. When the kings had accomplished that, they should be called fathers of the people. They had statues of themselves made and erected in the churches beside the statues of the idols, and those who would not bow down to them were either killed or put in chains. Your forefathers and the Twisklanders had intercourse with the kings and learned these follies from them. But it is not only that some of your men have been guilty of stealing titles. I have also much to complain of against your wives. If there are men among you who wish to put themselves on a level with Wr-alda, there are also women who wish to consider themselves equals of Frya. Because they have borne children, they call themselves mothers. But they forget that Frya bore children without having intercourse with a man. Yes, they not only have desired to rob Frya and the Iremoters of their honorable title, with whom they cannot put themselves upon an equality, but they do the same with the honorable titles of their fellow creatures. There are women who allow themselves to be called ladies, although they know that that only belongs to the wives of princes. They also let their daughters be called Majden, although they know that no young girls are so called unless they belong to a citadel. You all fancy that you are the better for this name-stealing. But you forget that jealousy clings to it, and that every wrong sows the seed of its own rod. If you do not alter your course, in time it will grow so strong that you cannot see what will be the end. Your descendants will be flogged by it, and will not know whence the stripes come. But although you do not build citadels for the maidens and leave them to their fate, there will still remain some who will come out of woods and caves, and will prove to your descendants that you have, by your disorderliness, been the cause of it. Then you will be damned. Your ghosts will rise frightened out of their graves. They will call upon Wr-alda, Frya, and her maidens, but they shall receive no succor before the jewel shall enter upon a new circuit, and that will only be 3,000 years after this century. The end of Rika's letter. The Oera book. Fragment. Therefore I will first write about Black-Adel. Black-Adel was the fourth king after Friso. In his youth he studied first at Texland, and then at Stavron, and afterwards traveled through all the states. When he was 24 years old, his father had him elected a Sega Asker. As soon as he became Asker, he always took the part of the poor. The rich, he said, do enough of wrong by means of their wealth. Therefore we ought to take care that the poor look up to us. By arguments of this kind he became the friend of the poor and the terror of the rich. It was carried so far that his father looked up to him. When his father died he succeeded, and then he wished to retain his office as well as the kings of the East used to do. The rich would not suffer this. So all the people rose up, and the rich were glad to get out of the assembly with whole skins. From that time there was no more talk of equality. He oppressed the rich and flattered the poor, by whose assistance he succeeded in all his wishes. King Askar, as he was always called, was 7 feet high, and his strength was as remarkable as his height. He had a clear intellect, so that he understood all that was talked about, but in his actions, he did not display much wisdom. He had a handsome countenance and a smooth tongue, but his soul was blacker than his hair. When he had been king for a year, he obliged all the young men in the state to come once a year to the camp to have a sham fight. At first he had some trouble with it, but at last it became such a habit that old and young came from all sides to ask if they might take part in it. When he had brought it to this point, he established military schools. The rich complained that their children no longer learned to read and write. Oscar paid no attention to it. But shortly afterwards, when a sham fight was held, he mounted a throne and spoke aloud. "The rich have come to complain to me that their boys do not learn to read and write." I answered nothing. But I will now declare my opinion and let the General Assembly decide. While they all regarded him with curiosity, he said further, "According to my ideas, we ought to leave reading and writing at present to the Magidan and wise people. I do not wish to speak ill of our forefathers. I will only say that in the times so vaunted by some, the Burgt Magidan introduced disputes into our country, which the mothers were unable either first or last to put an end to. Worse still, while they talked and chattered about useless customs, the Gauls came and seized all our beautiful southern country. Even at this very time, our degenerate brothers and their soldiers have already come over the Scheldt. It therefore remains for us to choose whether we will carry a yoke or a sword. If we wish to be and to remain free, it behoves our young men to leave reading and writing alone for a time, and instead of playing games of swinging and wrestling, they must learn to play with sword and spear. When we are completely prepared and the boys are big enough to carry helmet and shield, and to use their weapons, then with your help I will attack the enemy. The Gauls may then record the defeat of their helpers and soldiers upon our fields, with the blood that flows from their wounds. When we have once expelled the enemy, then we must follow it up till there are no more Gauls, slaves, or Tartars to be driven out of Frya's inheritance." "That is right," the majority shouted, and the rich did not dare to open their mouths. He must certainly have thought over this address and had it written out, for on the evening of the same day there were copies in at least 20 different hands, and they all sounded the same. Afterwards he ordered the ship people to make double prows, upon which steel crossbows could be fixed. Those who were backward in doing this were fined, and if they swore that they had no means, the rich men of the village were obliged to pay. Now we shall see what resulted from all this bustle. In the north part of Britain there exists a Scotch people. The most of them spring from Frya's blood. Some of them are descended from the followers of Keltana, and for the rest, from Britons and fugitives who gradually, in the course of time, took refuge there from the tin mines. Those who come from the tin mines have wives, either altogether foreign or of foreign descent. They are all under the dominion of the Gauls. Their arms are wooden bows and arrows, pointed with stag's horn or flint. Their houses are of turf and straw, and some of them live in caves in the mountains. Sheep that they have stolen form their only wealth. Some of the descendants of Keltana's followers still have iron weapons, which they have inherited from their forefathers. In order to make myself well understood, I must let alone for a while my account of the Scotch people, and write something about the near Krekelanders, which are Italians. The Krekelanders formerly belonged to us only, but from time immemorial descendants of Lydda and Finda have established themselves there. Of these last, there came in the end a whole troop from Troy. Troy is the name of a town that the far Krekelanders, the Greeks, had taken and destroyed. When the Trojans had nestled themselves among the near Krekelanders, with time and industry they built a strong town, with walls and citadels named Rome. That means spacious. When this was done, the people by craft and force made themselves masters of the whole land. The people who live on the south side of the Mediterranean Sea come for the most part from Phoenicia. The Phoenicians, or Puniers or Carthaginians, are a bastard race of the blood of Frya, find and Lydda. The Lydda people were there as slaves, but by the unchastity of the women, these black people have integrated the other people and dyed them brown. These people, and the Romans, are constantly struggling for the supremacy over the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans, moreover, live at enmity with the Phoenicians, and their priests, who wish to assume the sole government of the world, cannot bear the sight of the Gauls. First they took from the Phoenicians Marseille, then all the countries lying to the south, the west, and the north, as well as the southern part of Britain. And they have always driven away the Phoenician priests, that is the Gauls, of whom thousands have sought refuge in North Britain. A short time ago, the chief of the Gauls was established in the citadel, which is called Karnak. That is the corner whence he issued his commands to the Gauls. All their gold was likewise collected there. Kieran Hern, chosen corner, or Karnak, is a stone citadel which did belong to Calta. Therefore the maidens of the descendants of Caltana's followers wished to have the citadel again. Thus, through the enmity of the maidens and the Gauls, hatred and quarreling spread over the mountain country with fire and sword. Our sea people often came there to get wool, which they paid for with prepared hides and linen. Ascar had often gone with them, and had secretly made friendship with the maidens and some princes, and bound himself to drive the Gauls out of Karnak. When he came back there again, he gave to the princes and the fighting men iron helmets and steel bows. War had come with him, and soon blood was streaming down the slopes of the mountains. When Ascar thought a favorable opportunity occurred, he went with 40 ships and took Karnak and the chief of the Gauls, with all his gold. The people with whom he fought against the soldiers of the Gauls, he had enticed out of the Saxon Marken by promises of much booty and plunder. Thus nothing was left to the Gauls. After that he took 2 islands for stations for his ships, from which he used later to sally forth and plunder all the Phoenician ships and towns that he could reach. When he returned, he brought nearly 600 of the finest youths of the Scotch mountaineers with him. He said that they had been given him as hostages, that he might be sure that the parents would remain faithful to him. But this was untrue. He kept them as a bodyguard at his court, where they had daily lessons in riding and in the use of all kinds of arms. The Denmarkers, who proudly considered themselves sea warriors above all the other sea people, no sooner heard of the glorious deeds of Ascar than they became jealous of him to such a degree that they would bring war over the sea and over his lands. See here, then, how he was able to avoid a war. Among the ruins of the destroyed citadel of Stavia, there was still established a clever Burgtmagd with a few maidens. Her name was Reincha, and she was famed for her wisdom. This maid offered her assistance to Ascar on condition that he should afterwards rebuild the citadel of Stavin. When he had bound himself to do this, Reincha went with 3 maidens to Hals, which is Holstein. She traveled by night, and by day she made speeches in all the markets and in all the assemblies. Wr-alda, she said, had told her by his thunder that all the Frya's people must become friends, and united as brothers and sisters. Otherwise Finda's people would come and sweep them off the face of the earth. After the thunder, Frya's 7 watchmaidens appeared to her in a dream, 7 nights in succession. They had said, "Disaster hovers over Frya's land with yoke and chains. Therefore all the people who have sprung from Frya's blood must do away with their surnames, and only call themselves Frya's children or Frya's people. They must all rise up and drive Finda's people out of Frya's inheritance. If you will not do that, you will bring the slave chains round your necks, and the foreign chiefs will ill-treat your children and flog them till the blood streams into your graves. Then shall the spirits of your forefathers appear to you, and reproach your cowardice and thoughtlessness, The stupid people who, by the acts of the Magyars, were already so much accustomed to folly, believed all that she said, and the mothers clasped their children to their bosoms. When Frya had brought the king of Holstein and the others to an agreement, she sent messengers to Askar and went herself along the Baltic Sea. From there, she went to the Lithauers, the face-hewers, so called because they always strike at their enemy's face. The Lithauers are fugitives and banished people of our own race who wander about in the Twisklanden. Their wives have been mostly stolen from the Tartars. Tartars are a branch of Find Us race, and are thus named by the Twisklanders because they never will be at peace, but provoke people to fight. She proceeded on beyond the Sachsenmarken, crossing through the other Twisklanders, in order always to repeat the same thing. After 2 years had passed, she came along the Rhine home. Among the Twisklanders she gave herself out for a mother, and said that they might return as free and true people. But then they must go over the Rhine, and drive the Gauls out of Frya's southlands. If they did that, then her king Oskar would go over the Scheldt and win back the land. Among the Twisklanders many bad customs of the Tartars and Magyars have crept in, but likewise many of our laws have remained. Therefore they still have Majden, who teach the children and advise the old. In the beginning they were opposed to Frya, but at last she was followed, obeyed, and praised by them where it was useful or necessary. As soon as Oskar heard from Frya's messengers how the Jutlanders were disposed, he immediately on his side sent messengers to the king of Hals. The ship in which the messengers went was laden with women's ornaments, and took also a golden shield on which Oskar's portrait was artistically represented. These messengers were to ask the king's daughter, Frya, in marriage for Oskar. Frya came a year after that to Stavern. Among her followers was a Maggai, for the Jutlanders who had been long ago corrupted. Soon after Oskar had married Frya, a church was built at Stavern. In the church were placed monstrous images, bedecked with gold-woven dresses. It is also said that Oskar, by night, and at unseasonable times, kneeled to them with Frya. But one thing is certain, the citadel of Stavia was never rebuilt. Frya was already come back and went angrily to Prontlik the mother at Texland to complain. Prontlik sent out messengers in all directions who proclaimed that Oskar is gone over to idolatry. Oskar took no notice of this, but unexpectedly a fleet arrived from Hals. In the night the maidens were driven out of the citadel, and in the morning there was nothing to be seen of the citadel but a glowing heap of rubbish. Prontlik and Frya came to me for shelter. When I reflected upon it, I thought that it might prove bad for my state. Therefore we hit upon a plan which might serve us all. This is the way we went to work. In the middle of the Kreilwood, to the east of Ludverd, lies our place of refuge, which can only be reached by a concealed path. A long time ago, I had established a garrison of young men who all hated Oskar and kept away all other people. Now it was come to such a pitch among us that many women and even men talked about ghosts, white women and gnomes, just like the Denmarkers. Oskar had made use of all these follies for his own advantage, and we wished to do the same. One dark night I brought the Majden to the citadel, and afterwards they went with their serving maids, dressed in white, along the path, so that nobody dare go there any more. When Oskar thought he had his hands free, he let the Magyars travel through his states under all kinds of names, and, except in my state, they were not turned away anywhere. After that, Oskar had become so connected with the Jutlanders and the Denmarkers, they all went roving together. But it produced no real good to them. They brought all sorts of foreign treasures home. And just for that reason, the young men would learn no trades, nor work in the fields. So at last he was obliged to take slaves, but that was altogether contrary to Wr-alda's wish, and to Frya's counsel. Therefore the punishment was sure to follow it. This is the way in which the punishment came. They had altogether taken a whole fleet that came out of the Mediterranean Sea. This fleet was laden with purple cloths and other valuables that came from Phoenicia. The weak people of the fleet were put ashore south of the Seine, but the strong people were kept to serve as slaves. The handsomest were retained ashore, and the ugly and black were kept on board ship as rowers. In the fly, the plunder was divided, but without their knowing it, they divided the punishment too. Of those who were placed in the foreign ships, 6 died of colic. It was thought that the food and drink were poisoned, so it was all thrown overboard, but the colic remained all the same. Wherever the slaves or the goods came, there it came too. The Saxon men took it over to their marches, the Jutlanders brought it to Schoonland and along the coasts of the Baltic Sea, and with Askar's mariners it was taken to Britain. We and the people of Grenega did not allow either the people or the goods to come over our boundaries, and therefore we remained free from it. How many people were carried off by this disease, I cannot tell. But Prontlik, who heard it afterwards from the maidens, told me that Askar had helped out of his states 1,000 times more free men than he had brought dirty slaves in. When the pest had ceased, the Twisklanders who had become free came to the Rhine. But Askar would not put himself on an equality with the princes of that vile, degenerate race. He would not suffer them to call themselves Frya's children, as Rintya had offered them. But he forgot then that he himself had black hair. Among the Twisklanders there were 2 tribes who did not call themselves Twisklanders. One came from the far southeast, and called themselves Alamannen. They had given themselves this name when they had no women among them, and were wandering as exiles in the forests. Later on, they stole women from the slave people, like the Lithours, but they kept their name. The other tribe, that wandered about in the neighborhood, called themselves Franks. Not because they were free, but the name of their first king was Frank, who, by the help of the degenerate maidens, had himself made hereditary king over his people. The people nearest to him called themselves Theoth, his sons, that is, sons of the people. They had remained free because they never would acknowledge any king or prince or master, except those chosen by general consent in a general assembly. Askar had already learned from Rantya that the Twisklander princes were almost always at war with each other. He proposed to them that they should choose a duke from his people, because, as he said, he was afraid that they would quarrel among themselves for the supremacy. He said also that his princes could speak with the Gauls. This, he said, was also the opinion of the mother. Then the princes of the Twisklanders came together, and after 21 days they chose Alric as duke. Alric was Askar's nephew. He gave him 200 Scotch and 100 of the greatest Saxmannen to go with him as a bodyguard. The princes were to send 21 of their sons as hostages for their fidelity. Thus far all had gone according to his wishes. But when they were to go over the Rhine, the king of the Franks would not be under Alric's command. Thereupon all was confusion. Askar, who thought that all was going on well, landed with his ships on the other side of the Scheldt. But there they were already aware of his coming, and were on their guard. He had to flee as quickly as he had come, and was himself taken prisoner. The Gauls did not know whom they had taken, so he was afterwards exchanged for a noble Gaul, whom Askar's people had taken with them. While all this was going on, the Magyars went about audaciously over the lands of our neighbors, near Egmuda, where formerly the citadel Forana had stood. They built a church larger and richer than that which Askar had built at Staveren. They said afterwards that Askar had lost the battle against the Gauls, because the people did not believe that Woden could help them, and therefore they would not pray to him. They went about stealing young children, whom they kept and brought up in the mysteries of their abominable doctrines. Were there people who... Here, the manuscript ends abruptly. End of the Wr-alda book, the story of Frya and the Frisians, produced by 31 Pearls. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, and be sure to share your thoughts on this mysterious text in the comments.